The evidence for a 12th century Shroud of Christ surfaced recently in a document called the Pray Manuscript. It's in Hungary and takes its name from the scholar who first examined it. It can be reliably dated to 1196. This is one of its 5 illustrations, and it shows Jesus being placed in his burial shroud. Mechtild Fleury-Lemberg is a textile expert who is charged with preserving the fabric of the shroud. She studied these images of Christ in the manuscript and identified a number of features that reappear on the Turin shroud. The most obvious is that the figure on the shroud has the arms crossed and the thumb hidden under the hand.
On the top you see the painting with the corpse laying on a white linen, as one would expect, which is normal, a white linen. And you see the arms crossed, and you see the 4 fingers. The thumb is invisible, is hidden, and that is also a connection. It's also visible, the same on the shroud.
Lemberg is also very aware of the geometric weave of the shroud.
What is more important for a textile historian as I am, you see painted herringbone pattern. And this herringbone pattern is a typical sign of the Shroud of Turin.
Another feature of the cloth are the holes bunched together in an L shape.
These holes here, these L holes, they are on this picture and they are on the shroud 4 times because it was folded in 4 layers. You see here small holes, a little bit bigger, and then here you see the bigger ones.
Oh, I see.
The painter of this picture must have seen the Shroud of Turin. Otherwise it's not possible, because it's exactly the signs which we find also on the shroud in Turin.
If the carbon-14 test is right and the Turin shroud dates to the 14th century, then you wouldn't expect to find the same arrangement of holes in a shroud nearly 2 centuries older. And yet that's exactly what the Pray manuscript shows. So, if the shroud now in Turin was once in Constantinople, what was it doing there? And more importantly, why do we not hear from it again until 1360? Well, this isn't Istanbul, the modern Constantinople, it's Oxford. And I've come here to speak to a man who's made the study of Christian sacred images his life's work. Constantinople had the finest and most prized relics in the world.
This is a piece of the 12th century.
Professor Alexei Lidov has made a study of a rare memoir of a French crusader who hunted down these relics and gives us this intriguing account. It is set in Constantinople in 1204, around 10 years after the date of the Pray manuscript, and it mentions a shroud of Christ displayed in some kind of ceremony, in which the shroud with its figure of Christ was raised up every Friday.
I quote, "Amongst others, there was another of the churches called Our Lady St. Mary of Blacherna, in which was the shroud, in which our Lord was wrapped, and which stood up straight every Friday, so that the image could be clearly seen on it."
What does he mean by the image or the figure was lifted up?
A kind of rite or a special ritual happened every Friday in the Blacherna church related to the demonstration of the shroud of Christ. It seems to me very probable that the Constantinopolitan shroud and the shroud of Turin is one and the same piece, because of very rare similarities and this extremely important evidence by Robert de Clari that there was an image of Christ on the shroud.
As for why we don't hear of this shroud again, the crusader Robert de Clari tells us in his memoir that at the end of the Fourth Crusade, when Constantinople was ransacked by French crusaders, no one knew what became of the shroud. But we do know that the Turin shroud's first recorded appearance is 150 years later in France, in the hands of a familiar figure, one Geoffrey de Charnay. Recent research has found that he was married to a direct descendant of one of the leaders of the Fourth Crusade. If a French crusader took the shroud from Constantinople, it would explain why we only hear from it again in the hands of his heirs. But although the shroud disappeared from view for 160 years, Professor Lidov believes a memory of the image on the shroud was preserved in the art of the period. This icon of Christ is known as the Man of Sorrows. It became popular in Constantinople when the shroud disappeared. It has many of the distinctive features of the image on the shroud of Turin, the crossed arms, the hidden thumb. And significantly, it depicts an image of Christ emerging out of a box-like tomb, as if raised up from the dead. Many different versions of it exist. It was clearly a celebration of the resurrection of Jesus, and almost certainly invokes the ritual involving a shroud described by the crusader Robert de Clari. I wonder if its origin might be connected with the loss of the shroud in some way.
I think so. In a way, we may consider this as a kind of compensation of this great loss and the commemoration of the presence of the shroud in Constantinople.
The Pray manuscript, the testimony of Robert de Clari, and the Man of Sorrows icon all build a compelling case for the Shroud of Turin being older than the date specified by the carbon-14 test. It's a controversial claim, but it seems to be supported by an intriguing series of features, now clearly revealed by high-definition images of the shroud. When lit from the side, the shroud image all but disappears, and from the shadows emerges another dimension, the cloth's accumulated folds. Watch again what happens when the lighting changes. Notice the horizontal creases the whole width of the cloth. Linen has a kind of memory. It creases, and if it's kept folded for long periods, these creases become permanent and a record of how the cloth has been kept. According to Dr. Jackson, it's data that can be used forensically to link the Man of Sorrows icon to the shrouds of Turin and Constantinople. Dr. Jackson identified a series of fold marks at regular intervals, A, B, C, and D, that reflect the way the cloth was folded during storage. He expected the pattern to repeat itself along the whole cloth. Surprisingly, it doesn't. There is no fold E between the head and the navel. Instead, just below the crossed hands, Jackson found no less than 4 closely packed folds grouped together in what he calls the F block. Finally, the pattern suggested that there should be a fold here by the legs. And sure enough, on close inspection there was, but oddly, it was shallower than the others. Jackson developed a program to simulate all the folds and concluded that they must have come from some kind of device, perhaps for storing the shroud. Jackson looked for clues in the Man of Sorrows icon. Not only did it depict the one area of the shroud that was free of fold marks, but it was invariably shown as something coming out of a box. Perhaps the device that had formed the folds also displayed the shroud in the way described by the crusader Robert de Clari. I've been invited to witness the unveiling of a device designed and built by Jackson's team based on the fold mark evidence and the ceremony witnessed in Constantinople. So what does this machine do, and how does it possibly explain where the fold marks are in the shroud?
Well, all of them were calculated as to exactly where they were. If you remember the F block,
Yep.
the F block is this block here.